Okay, so we have a new episode of Legends and Leaders, and it's great to have Andy here, the CEO of Fender. Somebody who had just a ton of experience in the product space and the footwear space, CMO of Nike at a point, in the consumer product space with Disney, helping create the Princess outfit line. So just a plethora of experience, and I'm excited to have you and get into it. Thanks for coming.
Thank you, man. Glad to be here.
Great. So early on, Andy, when you were growing up, did you always aspire to be in corporate leadership? I read a bit that you were interested in kind of joining, trying to do your own band, and were an avid player of musical instruments. Like, how did this progression start to join to the corporate world?
Well, I wanted to be a professional musician, and for that reason, skipped going to college, but was realistic enough to actually get a day job. And that day job ended up taking me down the finance path, and eventually I became a qualified accountant. And at the ripe old age of 25, kind of arrogant enough to want a CFO title, and the only company that was kind of crazy enough to give me that was a small company in the UK called Nike.
Right. And when you were basically moving kind of into that CFO title, what did you think was like the end goal of where you were at? Did you just want to keep progressing kind of in corporate leadership, or did you want to really become the CEO of companies? Like, what were you kind of thinking at the time?
Yeah, I think in the UK, the predominant background for CEOs, at least during the time I was growing up, were finance backgrounds. So that's why I kind of went down that path. But interestingly enough, every company I worked for in the UK was actually American owned. And not one of them was actually run by a finance leader. They were run by engineers, or they, were different disciplines that were important to the companies, but never a finance individual. So, and what I found when I joined Nike, that actually doing the finances was the least important part of the job. The most important part was buying shoes from the parent company 6 months in advance. And so I was really a department store buyer. And had to do a lot of work to gain intelligence on what to buy.
Right. But I mean, I read also that you helped kind of create the limited edition footwear. Like that was like an early idea, and that was just kind of seemed to be an observation that you had when you were around a car. Like, how did that all come about?
Well, one of the big initiatives I kind of led at Nike to begin with was kind of custom footwear for unique footwear lines for dealers. But that business was all kind of low end business, and I was taking basically catalog shoes, reinterpreting them somewhat, and putting big discount programs together for the likes of JCPenney's, et cetera, et cetera. So I was basically developing a reputation in the company as a bottom feeder. So I was kind of thinking, to myself at that time, how can we do something differently at the high end, but had been modestly enough successful that I could buy myself a used Porsche 924, which is not even really a Porsche, it's a Volkswagen. And I was driving to work, and the first day I had it, and some guy drives up alongside me in a fly yellow Wolfsburg limited edition of this vehicle. So I had to figure out what that was, and I found out it was basically my vehicle with different leather and a $5,000 uptick. And I kind of thought to myself, I wonder if this would work for shoes. And when I went in the office that day, I kind of walked across the building to where the designers were and talked to a young designer there called Chris Avini and said, "Yeah, let's take the most expensive shoes that we have on the line. Let's put exotic leathers in them and a limited edition hang tag on them and see what happens." And lo and behold, we got 40 million in orders in the first at bat. And it kind of grew, and it became a bit of a monster over time.
Right. Did they think that, like, did you guys think that would be like a hit a hit like way to position the product, or you just like, all right, might as well just test it. It's an interesting idea. Let's just see how it does.
Well, I've been quoted as saying often that every decent idea I had was either kind of rejected or got me close to getting fired. Uh,
Really?
the custom footwear idea was not warmly embraced at Nike because, people who were running basketball or people who were running didn't think that we needed to do that, then their lines would work. But what I had discovered was that at the low end of the line, everybody was price promoting, and we were not getting any increased open to buy because dealers couldn't make money. So my kind of simple solution to that was give every one of them their own product line, which
Mm.
nobody liked that idea until we had to pivot out of Korea and Taiwan in terms of shoe manufacturing to places like China that didn't really have the capacity, big factories, but little capacity to make high-tech shoes. So I filled the void.
Huh.
And it worked. And I mean, my understanding now in terms of the percentage of business that's custom to retailers at Nike is close to 90%.
Huh.
Um,
Completely
so
changed.
it changed. And then even the limited edition concept at the time was not embraced because the company was so rapidly focused on sport and not fashion that the
Right.
notion of taking a high-end basketball shoe or a high-end running shoe and doing it in exotic leather was an anathema.
Huh.
But it worked. And it became embraced over time. But a lot of these ideas that I pioneered were very prone to resistance at the time.
Mhm. So was it like a similar situation with like the Disney princess outfits to want to go sell those? Like you had the observation, you went to this Disney on Ice event, you said, hey, this makes sense, and then like you were met with a lot of this pushback, so you just kind of you got pushed it to try the idea. So was that kind of what happened there too?
Well, the resistance there came from one individual whose last name happened to be Disney. Um, because Roy Disney at the time, who was running the animation studio, believed that none of the characters from various movies should be seen together, and that by
Really?
doing that, it would destroy the mythology of all the individual stories and erode the value of the DVDs that were in the vault. And I literally got hauled on the carpet in front of Michael Eisner, who was my boss then, and Bob Iger, who's CEO now. And, he wanted me to stop.
Huh.
And Michael, bless his heart, as did Bob, they kind of supported me and said, hey, Roy, let's give this a shot. And in the end, we built a really substantial business. But not only that, we sold more DVDs,
Huh.
not less, because these DVDs were in the vault, and this phase in a young girl's life only lasts a few years, and the videos were in the vault for 7 years at a time. Most of these young girls had gone through this period in their life where they're into fantasy role play and dress up and never got to see the DVDs. So this was a way to actually introduce them to the DVDs at a kind of, the right time in their kind of development.
Is that why you were also thinking to try to introduce the fairy tale wedding and more mature like these dresses? Because like you get to cater to that target audience because this audience was like only for really much younger.
Well, I mean, I think with the younger audience, I remember, and this was before my own daughter was born, you said if you open the door to a young girl's bedroom, what in the bedroom could be princessified? And the answer was every single thing, including the paint on the walls, which we actually did. We had princess-themed, paint done with one of the licensees. What happened with I mean, as the more we thought about it, the desire, the fantasy aspect of dressing up as a princess still persists, and particularly around events like a wedding. And we were seeing this demand actually happening. It was happening at Disney's parks, where there was a desire for couples who were staging their wedding event at the parks to
Huh.
kind of have a princess-themed wedding. And we said, okay, if they're going to be princess-themed wedding, they really need princess-themed wedding dresses.
Right.
So we worked with a local LA designer to design, a range of princess-themed wedding dresses, and it became a hit.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it's kind of just like these observations that you see when you go to different areas. You're like, okay, let's try to translate this into something. It's kind of like it's more of like a simplistic approach, but it's a very logical approach that it seems to be working.
Yeah, someone asked me recently, do I steal ideas from other people in our industry? And my response was, with due respect to everybody in the industry, no. But I steal ideas all the time. Um, and uh, and at Nike, I stole ideas from the two brands I stole ideas from most was BMW and Giorgio Armani.
Mhm.
And in BMW's case, I really liked the way that they took design iconography, all the way from the 7 Series down through the 5 Series, the 3 Series. So there was a connective tissue between the various price point levels. And so we introduced that thinking into footwear line structure design at Nike. And also, with Giorgio Armani, their sub-branding approach, I think, was brilliant. It's worked for them forever. And we kind of tried some of that approach, at Nike too.
Right. Yeah. I mean, it's pretty logical. It seems like a good direction. Yeah. So you then, I think you transitioned over to Quicksilver for a little bit, and then it was like a short stint there and went over to Fender. Like, why do you think that was kind of like it was a good thing, I guess, in a sense, for you to kind of go to Fender after? Like, why do you think that it was, that kind of lasted as long as it did?
Well, when I left Disney, it was with the intent of becoming a CEO. And my daughter was 5 at the time, and my wife and I, we had been in LA for 11 years, really enjoyed LA, but there are not actually that many CEO positions in LA that are outside of the media industry. And kind of after
Huh.
Disney, uh, there wasn't anything that was there. Either the CEO positions were either too big or too small. Um, so we had kind of decided, okay, we're going to go where the opportunity takes us, and if we move, we move. And this is a good time to do it because my daughter was 5. But she was diagnosed with type 1 diabetes months after I left Disney. And my wife and I decided, no, we need to kind of stay put, hunker down, kind of adjust to administering to her diabetes. And that's when the Quicksilver opportunity came up. Strangely enough, the Fender opportunity came up at the same time, but the
Really?
company was headquartered in Arizona, and I couldn't do it for the reason I wanted to be close to my daughter and my wife as we kind of dealt with this transition. So, after the 2 years I spent with Quicksilver, I mean, literally within hours of the press release coming out, Mark Fukunaga, who's the chairman of Fender now, and then he called me up and said, "Would you still consider becoming CEO of Fender?" And I go, "Mark, really, this is my dream job, but you're still in Arizona. My daughter still has type 1 diabetes." And he said, "Well, we've actually taken a lease on a building in LA. We want to start a digital division. We want to move product and marketing to LA. And we've Googled your home address from our leased office, and it's a 15-minute drive." And I go, "Okay, you got me." So the
The
plan,
timing there.
yeah, the plan is just aligned.
Right. So you mentioned it's like digital, like you wanted to be focused more digital. So you introduced a bunch of digital products in Fender, right? You have the Play, Songs, the Academy. Why really focus more on digital for a company you think a lot of people they really think is focused on these core products that are tried and true, right? Like the guitar.
Yeah, so at the time I joined, the company was 50/50 owned by Servco, who's our current um, owner, and TPG Growth. TPG Growth were very interested in the brand's potential in the digital space. Servco was very cognizant of kind of retaining the flame of the core business that, over the 60 plus years at that time that had generated the equity that we had in the brand. And I openly acknowledged to both of them when I came in that, yeah, I think there has a potential in digital, but I don't know what that means. So when I joined, the CMO of the company, Evan Jones, who actually was ex-Nike in my organization, but the organization was so big that I didn't even meet him, that
So,
we said, hey, we need data. Who's buying our guitars? And Evan conducted what I believe was the most comprehensive piece of industry research ever done. And 5 insights came out of that guided everything that we've done for the last 8 years now. One was 45% of the guitars that we sell every year go to first-time players, much higher than we would have guessed. 50% of those first-time players were women, which was a complete head snapper. And I think we were blindsided by that because women were predominantly buying acoustic guitars, and they were buying them online because the in-store shopping experience for a beginner generally, and a woman in particular, because there's no one in store for them to relate to, can be pretty intimidating. But the other big ahas were 90% of the first-time players abandoned the instrument in the first year, but spent 4 times as much money on lessons as they did on gear. And that the trend in lessons, of course, was towards online learning as opposed to in-person learning. So that really gave us the big direction arrow to create Fender Play, which we're very happy with and still committed to. And it gave us the kind of foundation to create the other apps, Fender Tune, Fender Tone, and we're kind of new technology in guitars has generally been rejected by players because it really hasn't created any value for them. But digital technology, I think, in amps has been adopted and is going to be increasingly adopted. So we made a pretty big commitment to digitization on the amp side with the Tone Master line, and we have a pretty exciting new product coming up here in the very near future on the digital space.
so you mentioned that 90% of people that buy, right, they don't necessarily become these lifetime users, and they were spending more money on lessons. Like, what do you think are some other ways that number gets smaller? Because the lifetime customer for you guys is incredible.
Yeah, well, the 10% of salmon that make it through the dam, as it were,
Yeah.
we estimate they have a lifetime value of about $10,000. They drive the hardware side of the business, 5 to 7 guitars, amps, accessories, etc. We built hooks into the product to increase engagement. And if we were able to reduce the abandonment rate by just 10%, if we took it from 90 down to 80, we would double the size of the entire industry. So we're always looking for that, but it is a little bit of a holy grail because, people want to learn an instrument, they want to learn a language, they want to learn how to do photography, they want to learn how to cook, and all of that was done in spades during COVID. But there is a natural fallout rate in all of those kind of learning experiences. Learning a language is another case in point. And I think everybody who's in this space, if it's Busu and languages or ourselves in guitar tuition, yeah, we're always looking to reduce the abandonment rate. But I think we're talking about small percentages because there's a human condition about. Well, let me put it another way. One of the other parts of the research that we did was that people in their teens were very interested in guitar. Then they get married and their interest level drops because they have other priorities. Then they have kids and their interest level drops further. And then they become empty nester and their interest life spikes up again. And the great thing about the empty nesters is that they have time and they have money. So I think there's a certain cycle to people's interest to learn that is dictated by their kind of life phases.
Right. So you just have to figure out when to target them. When's ideal. But as a company, the products that you have, right? These core hardware products, and these physical products, they're not, they don't necessarily need to be, from an outsider perspective. So how do you make them consistently at the cutting edge, and have new and ideas and inventions on these products when they may even not need them, but that's kind of the direction you want to go in.
Yeah, well, it's interesting you should say that because I think to an outsider, if you look at the Stratocaster or the Telecaster designs that Leo did in the 50s, I think the perception is, well, nothing's changed. And, my response to that is, well, that's true, except for the neck profile, the electronics, the pickups, the
Right.
tuning keys, literally every single the body shape, every single thing has changed. And every single change has been informed um, by listening to artists. We have relationships with about 4,000 artists, and Leo Fender himself was not a guitar player, but he was one of the world's great listeners, and he really designed a product to function for the working musician. And that's, because it was a form following function design ethos. That's why I think these forms have survived for so long. And next year will be our 70th anniversary of the Stratocaster, and it's both a cell. Yeah, I always kind of like. I'm a big Porsche fan, and but if you look at the 356 bathtub Porsche compared to what you buy now, the DNA is there, but the 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 execution is entirely different. And I would argue that because I have both the American Ultra Stratocaster compared to my 1954 Stratocaster, the DNA is absolutely there, but those two guitars couldn't be more different in the player's hands.
Hmm. Yeah. No, I think that's definitely a good way to, it definitely makes a lot of sense. And there's always things changing. I think just the outside appearance to the average person may not look as different, but yeah, internally for sure. When COVID happened, you guys were in a really interesting position because so many people wanted to play instruments and needed things to do it, at home. How have you kind of managed to take the success in there that happened over there and continue to target those customers and have more success, going forward when that was like a really kind of unique demographic to have?
Well, pre-COVID, we were growing healthily, kind of in the high single digit, low double digit range, and there were two external factors that were kind of providing some tailwinds for us in terms of growing consumption of recorded music through streaming, and that has not only accelerated during COVID, but it's increased. So, I mean, I think pre-COVID, Goldman Sachs estimated that by the year 2030, a billion people would be streaming. We're already at a billion because of COVID. And most of the new people who are signing up for streaming are signing up for what's called, they're listening to back catalog music, which is more than 3 years old and largely guitar-based music. And then, of course, there's the growth in live music experiences, particularly festivals, which of course closed down completely during COVID, but now is bigger and better than ever, and that is largely guitar-based music. And then in our case, kind of pre-COVID, we were spending, when I joined the company in 2015 and we were a $400 million company, we were spending 4% of revenues on marketing and largely trade oriented. Now we're pushing $1 billion. We're spending 100 million on marketing, and it's largely consumer oriented through social media. So we're providing our own tailwinds, but we've also got natural tailwinds. But what's interesting is we estimate that 30 million incremental players came in during COVID. So even if you apply a 90% abandonment rate to them, there'll be 3 million of them who will sign up for life. And that 3 million at an LTV of 10,000 per head is a 30 billion retail bubble that will sit on top of organic growth for the next decade. So I was bullish before COVID. I'm even more bullish now.
Right. And so with this new the social media focus and strategy, like, are you finding more success with that than having the guitar available, an artist at a concert? Is that, because it's so direct and because people are so engaged there, has that been really just like one of the most successful avenues for promotion?
Well, they're both really important, but how I would describe, I mean, I'll separate my comment from artist adoption from social media. But we've always had on the electric side, we've always had very strong artist adoption. So one of my goals was really to on the electric side, one of my goals was to get stronger artist adoption on the acoustic side. So that really was the genesis for creating the Acoustasonic line. And we're going to have some very interesting signature Acoustasonic models for premier artists coming out this year. On the social media side, again, if you go back to the 4% marketing largely trade, I used to describe new product launches as trees falling in the forest, because the only people who knew about them were in-store associates, sales associates, who were reading the paper trade magazines.
Yeah.
And it wasn't driving traffic to the stores in any way, shape, or form. Now, when we do a big product launch, because of the money that we spend in social media, we are driving traffic to our dealer stores and to the websites. And it used to be when we were doing a product launch, it was, well, let me see the sample and, I'll buy a couple and we'll see how it goes. And then, we've changed that approach. So, again, during COVID, we still kept on doing product launches and we weren't able to get samples. And the dealers were right, are you going to market this the same way that you did pre-COVID? And we said, yes, even more aggressively. And they said, okay, tell me how many I should buy. And, their sell-through has improved and their profitability has improved. So, again, it was one of the tricks, not trick, but it's the blocking and tackling approaches from Nike is to having, through product launches, product innovation coupled with, high quality elevated marketing just drives industry growth. And that's really what I think we brought to the MI industry at Fender now.
Mhm. And last question I have. So there's so much you've done already to transform the business with this digital, all this digital presence. What do you kind of think are the next steps and where do you want to go? To really to continue to innovate. Like, what are you thinking is next for Fender?
Well, we think we think there's still tremendous opportunity in the developed markets, the US and EM, in Europe. But we have some very good representation on the board from representatives from labels from other countries. So we think we're just scratching the surface in Latin America, China, Brazil, Indonesia, and ultimately India. Truly just scratching the surface relative to the potential there. And a lot of it is just figuring out the mechanics of how to get product in the hands of people who want them. But again, what we're hearing is in terms of music consumption, kind of Southeast Asia generally by the year 2030 will be the biggest music market in the world.
Amazing.
And when you consider what's happening in India, Korea, Japan, and China, and even in Brazil now, of successful artists in Brazil can tour for 10 years in Brazil without ever leaving the country or playing in the same venue.
Huh.
And it's not uncommon, for artists there to have audiences of 20, 30, as much as 60,000 in the arenas that they're playing in. So we're very optimistic about the future and kind of really interested in international growth.
Well, Andy, I appreciate you coming on, sharing some of the stuff you've already done, for your past and what you want to do going forward. I think you've done an incredible job at Fender and really throughout the other companies you've been at too. And I'm excited to see what you keep doing and wish you much success.
I appreciate it, man.